Hello and welcome to the Auto Limits podcast and on our quest to gain a fuller understanding of the films of Samuel Fuller. I, as ever, am your host, Craig, and with me is my co-host, Robert Beams. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Craig. How's it going?
It's going well. It's a bit chilly.
It is. It is a bit chilly. I'm in Spain, as regular listeners will know, and it's very chilly here. Although I assume probably 10 degrees warmer than it is in the UK.
Yeah, I don't think you've got anything to complain about, to be honest.
Then again,
Uh,
not to turn this into a really boring podcast about weather, but the thing is you got to bear in mind that Spanish apartments are not built for cold weather, so they don't have central heating, they don't have insulation, and they have very high ceilings and very cold, like tiled floors. So my point is even if it's colder in the UK, it probably feels warmer in your house than in my house.
it really doesn't. But anyway, we are here to talk about China Gate today. Which is the next film that we have
It is. It's the
in our
ninth,
series.
the
The
ninth
ninth,
on our journey. I think we're about a third of the way through now.
we are getting there, yeah. So this, funnily enough, this is actually the 10th film that he shoots.
Ah,
The Run of the Arrow was made before this, um,
interesting.
but the premiere wasn't until July of 1957, and this premiered in May of 1957.
Okay.
So we've got this in on a technicality.
Ah,
Um,
because Letterbox puts Run of the Arrow after 40 Guns as well.
well,
But did that come out between the two, actually, in
quite
actual fact?
possibly, but we're only talking about 6 weeks. So, there are 3 films this year. The man's been pretty prolific. And we are still at the sort of high end of his budgets with this one, which Run of the Arrow certainly is not. Um, we got another Fox film here, another CinemaScope film, but we've got a little return to black and white. Um, yeah, and this film was, if you can cast your mind back, or if you listen to one of our earlier podcasts, this is what was known as a programmer, a B movie. So this wasn't particularly first run. It was thrown in with some other things and left to see if it picked up any traction, basically. And surprisingly enough, I've just double checked the budget. The budget was $150,000, as opposed to the um, Crimson Kimono, which was the Crimson Kimono we watched last time, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. It's House of
No, it was
Bamboo.
no House of Bamboo. Keep doing that. House of Bamboo, which had a much larger budget, I believe.
Yeah, I wanted to
Uh,
ask you about this because we've talked about in his work with Fox, in working with Zanuck. I can't remember which Zanuck. Is it Darrell F. Zanuck?
yeah,
Yeah, working with Zanuck at Fox, and it seems like they have quite a close relationship, and that Zanuck's quite keen on him. I've read stuff about, like, for example, Hell and High Water being a film that Zanuck would show other directors to show them how to use CinemaScope and things like that.
yeah.
Zanuck clearly had a pretty decent relationship with Fuller at that point and seemed to really rate him. Why is it that the budgets start to go down and then he doesn't end up continuing to work for a big studio like Fox? What is there a breakdown in the relationship? Is his films doing really badly? Like, what's actually sort of going on there? Did you come across anything about that?
Well, I think the House of Bamboo made some money, washed its face, but wasn't a huge hit in the way that some of the others kind of really did exceed their budgets. And he's getting this reputation. I think we've last 3 films or 4 films we've talked about how it's pissed off some of the censors and the McCarthyists. So he sort of picks up this reputation as a provocateur, equally condemned by both sides of the political divide, and he's becoming quite. I don't know. He becomes not. He's not a tricky character in particular, but just kind of there is a sense here that there is baggage with him in his films
Mm.
that he's carrying that people don't necessarily want to help him pick up.
Well, I read that this one got banned in France, didn't it? And still
It
is, as far as I'm
did,
aware.
yeah. It got banned in France because of the opening sequence, which we'll talk about in a minute. I'm just trying to think if there is anything else, bits of context here. No, there's other stuff. The other stuff that I've got from the biography is stuff that we can do as we talk about. But you've led this nicely into the opening sequence. So do you want to start talking about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really the first thing I noticed about this film, other than we've returned to black and white, which looks very nice at the beginning of this film, is that this one's actually billed as Samuel Fuller's China Gate in the credits. And which is the first time, I think, maybe the only time in his career, I don't know, that he's got a name above the title sort of billing. Don't think we've seen that up to this point. And then as the credits go on, there's a very unusual, I think, perhaps slightly unique credit where the composer Victor Young had passed away during making the film. So the credit is like music by Victor Young, and then it says extended by his old friend Max Steiner, which is a very in the history of film credits, extended by his old friend is probably unique to this film, I would say.
Yeah, he talks in. He does talk in the biography about being particularly close to Victor Young, and this sort of hitting him hard during post-production. Yeah, which may be part of why it didn't come out. What may be part of it may be during post-production on Run of the Arrow. Sorry, so it started work on this, but they were finishing off Run of the Arrow when he died. I think that might be right. I'm confusing the chronology of it because I had to jump forward in the biography and come back again. But yeah, am I misremembering this? Did something similar happen with Kurosawa?
There was the situation a couple of years earlier than this with Kurosawa where his longtime composer collaborator passed away, I think after Seven Samurai. But there wasn't a similar thing where they had to sort of get someone else in to fill in the gaps, I don't think. There wasn't an extended by his old friend credit, unfortunately. The other thing that sort of to say for context with this film is that it's set during the first Indochina War between France and the colony of French Indochina, later Vietnam. And this coming out in 1957, not only had the first French Indochina War only recently ended, but this precedes the kind of, I mean, the Vietnam War, technically, like if you look on Wikipedia, the Vietnam War began in like 1955 or something at the end of the French Indochina War. But American troops don't land in Vietnam, I don't think, till the mid 60s, till I think 64. 64 is when you get like the Gulf of Tonkin incident, things like that. So this is like about the Vietnam War, basically. It's like the first Vietnam War film before big American involvement in Vietnam, which is really interesting. And I mean, we talked about with Steel Helmet that Fuller was.
Oh, sorry, go on. Sorry.
I was just to say, we talked about Steel Helmet, that Fuller was making, one of the first or the first Korean War films while that was going on. So it's really interesting that he's so sort of like ahead of the curve when it comes to these war films. They're really coming out like really contemporaneously with events.
Yeah, not only that, but I mean, the war films generally do kind of hit a reasonably well-trodden path, but this kind of really feels like the kind of prototype, the mold for every Vietnam film that you see after it. There's a lot of the kind of the band of people, the kind of the harsh conditions of the jungle, the kind of the booby traps, all that kind of stuff's in there. Yeah, it just seemed very like you say, ahead of its time to me.
So we get into the opening, and I was thinking, I'd already read ahead of time this was banned in France, and that like the French consul or something in Hollywood had lunch with Fuller and tried to persuade him to rewrite the opening, but they'd become really good friends even though Fuller refused, and that this is the guy that wrote White Dog that he later adapted into a film. So they became like mates, which is like a really interesting, like weird little thing off the back of it. But so after hearing that it was banned in France, I thought, oh, this opening is going to be really scathing of French colonies and all of that. And no, it isn't at all. It's basically like oh, these little Asian fellas were doing really well under the French before World War II. They got all these wonders and all this technology, and it was going great. Then the Japanese came in. Now the French are trying to get rid of the commies. That's basically it. Like, what is the thing that the French are upset about in the opening? I'm sure it does present that they're having difficulty retaining the colony, which I guess would upset them. But I think at this point they'd already kind of lost the first French Indochina War, or sort of had problems there. So, what is the background on that? That's so confusing to me. Or did you take a different interpretation of that opening? Do you think I'm wide of the mark there?
I don't know. I mean, he talks about it not particularly. He talks about not being overly interested in the situation, the political situation there, and that being the background. I think the French were the French took offence to it, thought that it was portraying them in a bad light, like you say, that they basically they'd bungled the situation there, and they couldn't really be. They didn't have a handle on it.
I think what's missing in translation here is that today we're so staunchly anti-colonialism in our culture, more or less, probably not as much as we could be, but we're kind of more critical of colonialism than we probably were in the late 50s. So what seems to me to be tepid, if maybe non-existent criticism, probably at the time seemed more incendiary.
Yeah. I mean, he also talks about the portrayal of the he's not, he's not a fan of communism at all, but he talks about portraying all the sort of communists as welcoming, friendly, community-minded kind of. They're not bad. They're not like evil communists. They're they're all like, come on in, and they all get betrayed by Angie Dickinson.
Now that you've mentioned it, I hadn't actually thought about that, but that is basically what the film consists of. It consists of Angie Dickinson, who's this sort of they always refer to her as half caste, which I'm pretty sure you don't say anymore. This Angie Dickinson is this kind of half Chinese, half bit Vietnamese, bit American, like mixed sort of race person who they get to lead them behind enemy lines because she's friendly with all the different people from everywhere, basically, because it's implied, I guess, she's a prostitute, but she also brings like booze and stuff to people, and people seem to think they're going to be able to sleep with her basically when she turns up, which implies that happens.
That's happened, and she's a smuggler, and she's owned a bar, and she's done this, and she's done that.
And the whole film does, as you say, it does turn into her walking up to like a goalpost and somebody really friendly going, "Oh, hey, Lucky Legs, how are you?" And her being like, "Oh, great, I had a wonderful time." Then someone coming up and stabbing them in the back. That has basically happened so many times. There's the bit that really stood out to me because the dialogue was so kind of simplistic and slightly stilted, and the action was so at odds with the kind of dialogue. Was there's a bit where she's talking to two guards and you're behind those guards and you can see people creeping up to stab them, and she's in front of them going, "I just spoke with the general and he says you're the two best guards in the camp." And then people come up and stab them in the back. Most of the film is that.
I think part that there was and there was part of the partly to do with the idea that the French were bungling the situation, and partly to do with the fact that the communists were portrayed in the sympathetic light, basically.
Yeah. So maybe when it says they wanted the beginning rewritten, maybe it was less because they thought the beginning was full of attacks on France and more because they felt the beginning could have condemned the communists more.
Yeah. And he basically says that when they asked him to change it, he said, "I'm not going to change it. I didn't film it. It's all news footage. That this is what happened. I'm going to keep it in, like it or lump it." I like that sequence. It reminded me of like the Why We Fight newsreel stuff, and there's some pretty harsh imagery in here as well, which is another thing that I think is why the budget was small and why this was put out as a programmer, because it doesn't shy away from violence at all. Do you want to start talking through it then?
Sure. I was gonna say, just because it's the only other bit of kind of trivia I have from my sort of looking at trivia bits. is that Nat King Cole is in this movie as a supporting actor, and supposedly this could be apocryphal, but supposedly Sam Fuller cast him on the basis of liking his face on a record cover.
Yeah.
And then and then apparently he said to Zanuck he wanted Nat King Cole, and they said, well, we're not going to be able to get him because he makes more in a week than the entire budget of this film. But then they showed the script to Nat King Cole, and he agreed to do it for a minimal wage because
Yeah.
he just liked the character and stuff. That's
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, they met and they had dinner, and Sam Fuller and his wife got on with Nat King Cole and his wife, and they talked about the script. Sam Fuller talks about he wanted Nat King Cole because he wanted somebody who could be very masculine and kind of carry off that kind of idea that they were a battle-hardened soldier, but had a really tender quality to them as well. And that, yeah, and also that originally he hadn't particularly written the part of Goldie as an African American part, and that appealed to Nat King Cole because he was just like, well, you know, could be anyone. Why not you? And they got on really well, and they spent some time. Sam Fuller spent some time in his house where they had his recording studio, and Nat King Cole said, "What's your favorite song of mine?" He said, "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles." And they recorded a version together in Nat King Cole's home.
Is that available? The Sam
don't-
Fuller Nat King Cole version?
I doubt it very much, but yeah.
It's a
They-
sought after bootleg among Nat King Cole fans.
Yeah. But yeah, they got on very, very well, which is why he agreed to do it for no money. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really cool. So basically, the film begins. I'm going to tip my hand really early on this. Like for about, I think at least the last three Fuller films, including this one, I've really loved the opening and then been kind of disappointed by the rest of the film. This one, this is probably just because I've been watching a lot of Spielberg recently, and I'm sort of seeing the DNA of Spielberg in a lot of stuff that I know I watched Dr. Zhivago the other day, and obviously David Lean's a huge influence on Spielberg, and I saw loads of kind of Spielberg tendrils in that. And it's very similar here, where you have this opening where it really did feel like, yeah, this is kind of how Spielberg would kind of angle and shoot this. He's got a little kid. So you're in this war zone sort of area, rubble and everything. And then you immediately open on like a little kid. And what's even more sympathetic than having a little kid, it's a little kid with a little tiny dog in his coat he's trying to protect because we're told that people are eating all the animals. And then it cuts to like just a mean man with a knife who starts looking at that dog and walking with his knife.
Very
and the little
glinty
kid,
knife.
Yeah. And then the kid hides the dog in his coat and starts to try and run off. And the bit that really reminded me of Spielberg, other than obviously Spielberg loves kind of kids in peril and that kind of thing, is you get this really nice crane shot where the crane kind of lifts up over the rubble and the kid starts kind of making his way through this kind of just half destroyed sort of town that they're in. And you also get slightly later as well when the kid's trying to basically, an aid parcel gets dropped. He's hiding from the guy with the knife, and this aid parcel gets dropped and everyone goes running over to it. And then again, very sort of Spielbergian, you get another kind of crane shot that's kind of going up as we see him winding his way through these crowds of people who are kind of going down the road towards the aid parcel. And those bits really stuck out to me, obviously knowing, as we've talked about previous episodes, that Spielberg was a big Fuller fan and references him in a few of his films and has him in a role in 1941 and stuff. So that was really interesting. I really liked that stuff. You go from
There's a nice little bit where he goes and sits in like a machine gunner's nest.
Yeah.
And the guy gets scared off and he just sort of sits and waits for him to go away and then runs off again.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get introduced to Angie Dickinson's character, who's always called Lucky Legs, by her legs. The camera kind of Michael Bay-esque kind of goes from her toes all the way up her legs, like to introduce her. She's obviously a white actress being cast in this role. I think which was the Fuller film we saw? It was House of Bamboo, wasn't it? Where Fuller actually had an Asian actress playing opposite a white guy and then be in a relationship. I guess that was a bridge too far on this one for whatever reason. So they cast Angie Dickinson in this role. But basically you set up that this is her kid and that she's trying to kind of look after him in this kind of terrible situation. And then you get these French legionaries turn up and they basically say to Lucky Legs, they're like, look, like you've basically what they're saying is you're a good smuggler, you know everyone, you can kind of get us all about. If you help us on a mission to go and blow up this big ammo dump by the Chinese border that's supplying the communists, then we'll get your kid to America. They offered to set her up with a nice bar in Saigon. She's like, no, the only thing I want is if you take my kid to the US because you have a better life there. So then they're like, all right, we'll get your kid to the US. And then she discovers that in this group of dynamite legionnaires is the terrible, boring Sam Fuller protagonist du jour of this film, played by Gene, whoever the hell, I don't know what his name, Gene Barry or something. He's boring, just like the last two Sam Fullers were boring protagonists. Bring back Gene Evans, justice for Evans. That's what I say. Anyway,
and I want to go back because I think there's some stuff here that
okay.
can unpack it. I think she when she comes in, she's immediately a really interesting character. Like, she's got control of the situation. We find out that she runs a bar, she's smuggled, she's done this, she's done that. She's a hard drinker, and everyone's got a lot of respect for her. But she comes in and she's immediately the smartest person in the room. She's got control of everybody.
Do you know what my note was when I saw that she was a drinker and in control of the situation, and she had this kid with this American GI and was a potential prostitute? I wrote, she will not be allowed to survive this movie.
Yeah, quite possibly. But she reminded me. It reminded me of Johnny Guitar, and the lead in Johnny Guitar was that
Sterling Hayden, isn't it? Johnny Guitar.
No,
oh, sorry, Joan Crawford.
Joan Crawford. That's
Joan
who she
Crawford,
reminded me of.
Yeah. Obviously, she didn't remind you of Sterling Hayden.
Yeah. And then I like when her ex-husband comes in. I like the fact that Fuller seems to reverse his policy on cold clocking women, and she gets to slap him straight away and then carry on.
She doesn't get cold clocked in this, does she?
No,
and there's several opportunities where you think like maybe one of the communists at the end when she's in a bit of peril. In fact, that guy's super nice as well. Not to jump ahead too much, but there's like a communist commander who you think, oh, he's rumbled her. And if it was like most films, he would probably then kill her or threaten to kill her. Actually, he's like, come on, I'll take you to Moscow. And she just pushes him off the balcony.
Yeah, he talks about this. He talks about this in quite a lot. He talks about this quite a lot in his in one of the interviews I read about this. That he's just a nice guy who here we go. He wants to take her to Moscow so she can escape the war and racism. He's an ex-teacher which is true. He's an ex-teacher who doesn't make a lot of money because teachers don't make a lot of money anywhere in the world. In Moscow, he could become a general and a diplomat because he speaks 7 languages, and even Ho Chi Minh only speaks 5. He's a really nice guy, and he wants to save this woman and her child, but she kills him. I love that type of story.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it, this film, in that respect? It does. It's strange because on one hand you get lines in it like the boring character Gene Barry, whatever his name is. That's his name, right? Gene Barry.
Yeah.
I think Nat King Cole says this line actually was what I started out to do in career I didn't finish. There's still a lot of live commies around. You get lots of sort of lines like that about wanting to kill commies. So on one hand it feels like, okay, this is Fox and Fuller trying to make it very clear to the McCarthy people that Fuller is not like pro-communist. But then, as you say, the communists are just super nice, and the Americans are the French and the Americans are the ones that go around stabbing them all in the back and like all of this stuff.
Yeah, and that's all part of it. There's a lot of flag waving, and there was the quote from last week where he was talking about I don't believe in being bigoted towards anyone, and I think that includes communists. Like he's not a fan of communism, but he's not he's not going to write off any group of people just on the base of their membership of any group, and he's certainly really, really sympathetic towards the communists in this film, more so than the protagonist, who's a bit of an arsehole and a bit of a fascist at times as well. because he's not, he kind of rejects his son because his son is more obviously of Chinese heritage than
Well,
his
can we finish the summary?
yeah.
Can I get that
Yeah,
in? So
go for
basically,
it.
what I was saying is, Angie Dickinson agrees if they can get her son to China, but then she finds out that among the dynamiters is this Gene Barry fella, and he happens to be her lover, her husband basically, who that was their son. And as soon as he found out that her son had Asian features, he legged it and he left and basically abandoned them because he's a massive racist. And then they go on their sort of mission. Basically, in summary, they go on their mission through the jungle. Loads of times she goes up to guards and smiles at them, and then they get stabbed in the back. And then they blow up a big thing at the end. But she has to be the one to go and like literally smash the dynamite because the cord's not working. So she blows up, which is good because she's a little bit of a whore and she needs to not survive the movie. And then and then it ends with Gene Barry walking along holding the hand of the kid who he's now decided he will look after, and Nat King Cole singing a song called China Gate that he also sings at the beginning, kind of bookends the film. That's a bit rubbish as a song. It basically involves him kind of going, just saying the words China Gate to a vaguely sort of Asian. Yeah, you a big fan of that one?
I didn't think it was rubbish. The what it's not him repeating the words China Gate over and over.
No.
It's just a refrain at the start of the verses. But yeah, no, I thought that was nice. I love the bit where he's kind of walking through at the start singing the song. I thought again, like, this sort of tender masculinity of this kind of rather
Yeah.
thoughtful GI, that you wouldn't in a sort of Band of Roughnecks film. Everybody kind of has got this apart from the apart from the main character, everybody in it's got this sort of tender humanity, or whether or not it's a guy who's a guy whose wife sort of wastes away with um like melancholy with the fact they can't have kids, or a guy who's got PTSD for being so consumed by hate that he murders a guy in cold blood. There's
You've got the
there's
guy who's having these horrible dreams of
yeah,
like
that's what I
seeing.
mean.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah,
Yeah,
who they threatened to kill because of his PTSD at one point, which is quite
yeah.
a nasty scene.
You got the French guy who's kind of contemplating about him quite a jolly way, contemplating about him being a difficult father and husband because he's used to conducting traffic all the time, and
This
he was a police officer who's like, he's like, I know I'm a difficult
it,
man, and
it's amazing. That's my favorite scene in the whole film. So basically, this guy, there's kind of like a tense scene between Angie Dickinson and Gene Barry talking about the son he abandoned and everything, and then abrupt tonal shift. It cuts to this jolly French guy going, "Did I ever tell you why they call me Pigalle?" And then he tells this story, and all the music starts to be all jolly, and then you start hearing these non-diegetic sounds of whistles as he talks about directing the traffic and stuff. And he starts telling this story exactly as you said about his wife and kids and how he's directed them and how they're much happier now that he's away at war. And he starts building to this big crescendo about how lovely it all is and how great it is that he's at this war and isn't it wonderful. And I thought he's about to get interrupted with the bullet. And then I was not disappointed because he gets interrupted by like a hail of machine gun fire. I thought he was just going to get. I thought at the end of that monologue he was just going to get shot. Yeah, like one in the head. But he gets absolutely. Yeah, but he gets absolutely massacred. This guy.
it's a real kind of like whiplash kind of moment of sudden violence, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it's yeah. It was a little bit what the fuck, and then that goes into a really nice kind of a good battle scene. Really, I like the action in this. I think it's very authentic. There's a lot of that in here. Like he writes in. This is kind of partly Fuller's maybe second attempt or third attempt at sort of exercising some of his demons that he writes about, that eventually culminates with the big red one and his way of dealing with, as he describes, his nightmares. And there's a lot of that. A lot of the stuff that he's seen in war is brought into this. The story that Nat King Cole tells about that when somebody asks him, "Is it true that you got, you got the Germans? Is it the Germans to bury the victims of Falkenau when you liberated it?" And he goes, "Yeah, it seemed like we should give them a proper burial." Um, that's he did that. He was there. He took 16mm footage of it, which is available to watch on YouTube, and it's quite harrowing. That's obviously something that's kind of seared into his memory in a very profound way. Is liberating that camp, and that's why that story's in there.
They mentioned the Big Red One in a story as well, don't they? Specifically, I
Yeah,
remember hearing that.
yeah, that's that's part of
Yeah.
his historical accuracy, because that's who he was with when they did that. Yeah, and I think I really like the way everybody gets their character moment in a way that feels authentic, and to me it's a lot of this is about, I mean, like you say, it goes on a little bit. Even I thought it goes on a little bit for an hour and a half, but I thought it was, it's all about authenticity and empathy. Um, for the for the most part, it was about people, like even the German character who fought for the Nazis during World War II. He's like, um, Hitler turned my ears into sponges. I couldn't see how ridiculous all this was, and he's kind of accepted into this band of brothers, of kind of these lost souls of the Legionnaire, of the French legions. And Fuller writes that the only the reason that he used the French Legion was, like, partly because it made sense for the story, but it was an excuse to get an international group of people together
Which
and
he
tell,
always likes to do in those war
yeah,
films.
and to sort of tell these different stories and look at these different perspectives. Yeah, and yeah, really, really, a lot of it lands with me. A lot of it, Nat King Cole especially, and the German fella in particular, really landed with me as I was watching this. And part of that idea that he's expressed before, that war is intense, long periods of boredom, punctuated by intense sudden moments of violence, which is how it's portrayed here. The comedy guy who gets massacred, or walking along and suddenly Nat King Cole's foot's been spiked and needs to be fixed, and things like that. It's yeah, it's it's good. I did for a little while think that there was going to be a romance between, because Gene Barry seemed so unredeemable at the start. I thought the romance was going to be between Angie Dickinson and one of the Asian soldiers, because they've got a real flirtatious thing going on and a real sort of chemistry. He ends up getting blown up by a mine, and that was quite disappointing. But yeah, that, I know what you mean. It goes. I thought it went on a little bit within that long section in the middle, but there was enough of it in there, like I say, humanity and empathy, for me to stick with it. Yeah.
I think something that I noticed, again, because I've been watching all these Spielberg things, is one of the things that's kind of obvious to say about early Spielberg films is that he is very good at hiding the limitations, Spielberg, right? So he'll have famously the shark that doesn't work, or this ET puppet that's supposed to be a main character in the film, and he'll manage to shoot around them so that they're completely convincing even now, like they work really well. And even watching some of Spielberg's really old, like personal films he made, where he was doing these really obvious practical effects with like the really low-fi sort of practical effects rather than obvious, where people were like stamping on planks of wood to make dust go up to make it look like they've been shot stuff. Spielberg's very good at shooting around limitations. And one thing that I thought about this was that the opposite's true of Fuller. Like if something's a bit creaky, if something's going to be a bit cheap, it's gonna be creaky and cheap in the Fuller film. He's just gonna show it creaky and cheap. So like you have some really bad back projection in this film. You have loads of optical zooms where he just clearly just decided, I guess, in the edit, like, okay, we'll just crop that. We'll just go into that now like this. There's lots of things like that in this where I was just kind of like, as an it just really struck me because I've been thinking about the Spielberg films recently. Just that this is not a director who spends a lot of time and effort trying to hide the joins. You know, it's like we've seen in some of his earlier films. Like I've forgotten the name of it now. What was the one with the newspaper?
Park Row.
Park Row. In Park Row, we've talked about before the very obvious kind of set and the way that you can see the kind of painted ends of the streets very clearly, and the way that you can see sort of extras stopping and waiting to be shot and then walking and stuff like that. Like when you talk, and it makes sense, like you've talked several times in the films about how quickly a lot of them were made. I'm guessing this was made very quickly if he also made 2 other films this year. So it does feel to me like with Fuller, it's like one take sometimes. Like he's just going like, yeah, okay, we got that. Do you want to do another one, Sam? And they're just like, nope. I think that's fine. Let's move on to the next scene. I mean, do you get the sense that he's not a guy that does takes of things?
He's definitely not. I mean, the kind of the introduction to the Dabrowski book talks about that. Like he just, you know, she particularly she brings up the use of optical zooms and the sloppiness. Also, I think that part of that with this film though is that all the money seems to have gone on the first and last 15 minutes.
Yeah, I felt that.
And so the bits in the middle where I think maybe he was thinking he was in common ground because it's stuff that we've seen in Still Helmet or Fixed Bayonets and things like that. So maybe he just felt a little bit more confident that he could pull that sort of stuff off. But it does rub against the start and the end, the bookends.
There's also a really sloppy use at the beginning of stock footage suddenly, because the beginning looks amazing. Like I said at the beginning, with these crane shots, and it's really beautiful cinematography. It looks immaculate. Like it looks as good as a Sam Fuller film I've seen look so far at the beginning. And then after the aid parcel drops, it just cuts suddenly to like really obviously newsreel footage of people like running along and stuff that's at massive odds with the footage that he's done himself. And it's kind of unnecessary because he's already got all these crowds of extras and stuff coming in around the aid parcel. So that was really jarring to me. I mean, I guess he wanted that authenticity of using some of that footage as well. But as a craft, as a film, it just kind of stands out a lot.
Yeah, I think it's because obviously the whole, you know, we're getting quite used to him having these exposition dumps at the start of his films. This is by far the slickest because of the way it's the way that it does use that kind of why we fight documentary feel to it. And this feels a little bit like he's thrown in a little bit more of that documentary footage, but because it is at odds with the rest, you know, the fictional narrative has kicked in, like it sits apart from that. And it, you know, I don't know, maybe if maybe if he'd used more rather than less, it would have sat a little bit better. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it had been more of a sustained sequence of that.
A kind of proto Oliver Stone, you know, sort of cutting between different mediums, and you know.
Yeah, I mean, he is a proto Oliver Stone, isn't he? You know, he's making these Vietnam War films and these provocateur films that
about the American moment at the moment when it's going on. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, he talks about the Vietnam War later on when he's talking about something else. He's talking about he talks about America being a young country that's not used to losing anything, and that basically he talks about he kind of talks about America as being immature and unable to take any sort of valid criticism as anything but an inherent attack on its inherent character, and he's got no time for it as usual, which is quite nice. Should we talk about the ending, because it goes a little bit Bond? It goes a little Bond layer.
It does a bit, yeah.
So after Angie Dickinson's kind of gone around getting people stabbed in the back, they end up at the place where they know the weapons are coming to, but they're not sure exactly how. There's all these tunnels through these mountains, and it's like a needle in a haystack. Which tunnel is it? And then she meets, is it Cham? Colonel Cham, who she knows from her days running bars and things like that, who's clearly in love with her, as they all are. And he's very pleased to see her, and he kind of gives her a little tour and offers to take her and her son to Moscow, and said, look, have a night, think about it, which is still not very much time. And in order to he tries to sort of impress on her how they're definitely going to win the war by taking her to see the weapons, the ammo dump. So she knows, and they all set everything up.
That's kind of like if Tarkin and Vader had taken Leia to see the exhaust ports on the Death Star, isn't it?
It is. But the thing is, in the Bond film, it's the bit where the villain kind of gives away
the plan.
But in this, it's like, there you go. It's somebody being nice and trusting and saying this, opening their world up to her. And then she goes away and lets the others know what there is. He realizes what she's up to and kind of takes it in a really good spirit and says, look, you've still got a chance to choose sides here. Nothing's wrong yet. And sort of comes up to her and sits next to her, sits on this windowsill, carries on chatting, and she just
push. Yeah.
Pushes him out of the window.
It's interesting. I like the film a lot more, having heard you give Fuller's quote about it, because the thing is, at the time, I felt like my sympathies were supposed to be kind of more anti-communist, and hearing him say, no, this is just a really nice guy, I'm sort of like, yeah, that's kind of fun. I kind of like that. I kind of like how cartoonishly sort of like just chill this guy is, and how she just betrays all these people.
The thing is, funny. That we've talked about the sort of, he's used the term flag waver to like insult people before, and he's got, his whole perspective on war is kind of, apart from where he talks about defeating the Nazis because they're absolutely opposed to everything that he stands for. His whole perspective on war is it's the people in the trenches who have to fight it, and the people giving the orders are full of shit as far as he's concerned, and it's all conflicts that ordinary people have no real, for the most part, it's conflicts that ordinary people have no business being in, but do so with a quiet dignity and humanity to the best of their ability in an undignified and unhumane environment. So he talks about being interested in the characters, and that is absolutely at the heart of the film, and the fact that it is set in during the Indochina conflict, or the set that they are, it's about an anti-communist mission, or the fact that they're legionnaires, is all incidental, and that he's not political about it at all. It's the setting that works for the story. It's naive to say that a film is not political, even if you intend it not to be, I think. But it's not his intention to say anything about these are the good guys. Also, yes, she dies, doesn't make it through, but she's not. There's other characters, like when we see the naked kiss later on. There are a lot of Sam Fuller's female heroines are strong characters, or characters who can hold their own. The scientist in Hell and High Water is objectified by everybody, but just gets on with her job and is a vital key part of that crew. There is a sense in Sam Fuller's film, and I'm sure I'll find some quotes. I've read some quotes in the past, and I'm sure I'll find some, especially when we talk about The Naked Kiss, where it's not about the women themselves, it's about the circumstance, or what they've done. It's about the circumstances of the society around them, and how that doesn't for him, it's about showing the oppression and the strength that the female characters show in the face of that oppression. So yes, she dies, but she dies the hero. She's the one who gets it done in the end. She's the one who gets it all done. She's leading. She's always at the front of the group. She knows where the mines are. She knows where the guards are. She knows how to get in. She knows where to find it. And at the end, when the line's been cut, she knows that she's the only one there who can trigger the explosion and save the day. So I don't. And she talks about she's so strong as well, where she's talking about everything that she's done, being for her son, and how she would do it all again, and she'd do worse to protect her son.
The way it's coded, though, several times, even if it's not stated this way, is that she has been sexually promiscuous in order to protect her son with these people. So the fact that she's coded as a kind of prostitute is why she has to die. That's why these characters in other Fuller films who are not that way, who are shown to maybe be still as dynamic a character or as big a protagonist, but they're not prostitutes. I just think it's the kind of morality of Hollywood during the era that had to be the payoff to that character.
Yeah, I don't think
I don't think that's a Fuller thing. I think that's a studio thing.
Yeah, quite
I think
possible.
that the prostitute woman cannot survive the film because we can't say, look, and here's a happy family, and she's fine, and we condone all of this. It was just that's what I think is going on there.
Yeah, quite possible. That might be the greatest. I don't think it's. It might be something like you say that's a studio thing or that is inherent at the time. I don't think that is Sam Fuller's reason in the slightest. I think it's heroic. She's another soldier, somebody else who's willing to put her life on the line for the others, for her son in particular. And I think that's Fuller's reasoning for it. I don't think I certainly don't think because she's a I don't think as far as he's concerned, as the storyteller, that's the reason why she has to die. And I don't think he ever says that it never comes across like he never suggests that she needs to redeem herself in any way. She owns what she's done, and she's she's got perfect, and she's got right. She's done everything for the right reasons. She's not. She doesn't see herself as a victim, and the film never portrays her as a victim. She's always been, like I say, the smartest person in the room, the people everybody respects, the person everybody respects. And I respect that about the film,
Yeah.
And I like that. I see what you mean. As a general trope, that is definitely true. I think the film earns it in this case.
Yeah. Possibly. I mean, I'd rather see the boring racist man die, but yeah.
That was the other thing. I still, he does a bit of a quick turn at the end, the boring racist man.
He does.
But it's a lot more paced out than those sort of turns are in previous Samuel Fuller films. I think there's enough character moments in between to suggest that he's softening.
He apologizes to her before she goes and pushes the man out the window, doesn't she?
Yeah,
she goes off.
Yeah, I mean,
they do seed that through the film.
Yeah, and I like even the sort of underlying the idea that yes, they've got this difficult past, but they are struggling with their feelings for each other. Kind of that sort of lands for me a little bit, and then he does. It's difficult to like a character whose arc is they've got to learn how to love their son,
even though he looks Asian.
Exactly, that's what I mean. And especially a character who earlier in the film as well has decided that a character needs to die because they've got PTSD and that they're a liability.
But then can't actually go through with it when they're told they have to be the one to do it then, which is like such a heel move in a movie. Like if you're the action hero, imagine that if like Bruce Willis turned up in an American movie and he was the one making the hard choices and he said, look, we've got to kill these men. And that guy turned around and said, okay, but you're going to have to do it. And they went, on second thoughts, we'll let you off with a warning this time, but if you do it again, It's just like that's such a weak character when they do that.
It's the sort of is it I can never remember if it's Stromae or Stormare. Peter Stormare. That's the
Yeah.
Peter Stormare character in the remake. He's the one who kind of suggests that. Not the hero.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah. But anyway,
Yeah,
and then
you're
and
absolutely
then
right.
and then well, there is some rather cheap but probably of its time model work with the plane, and the captain's flying the plane, and it's only Nat and Gene who actually survived the movie. The pilot is the captain, but his face is properly blooded. Like he is like it's not just a little cut and the kind of the kind
Yeah.
of wheezing around. Like there is some viscera.
It's a crimson mask, as Jim Ross would say.
Yeah. And there's a fair bit of that. Like the I've mentioned the spike going through Nat King Cole's foot already, but that's properly there. It's properly on the screen in a close up, and the slow kind of bringing it up, agonized, and the guy who gets decimated by the machine gun fire, which we've talked about. Like this is pretty strong violence. This isn't and like I say, the battles are people hiding behind things or sort of shooting through the bushes. It's not that kind of John Wayne running forward and people standing, and it's people sort of looking like they're genuinely getting hurt and genuinely like fighting for their lives. And that's something that he's known for, as well as the authenticity of his battle scenes. Although he talks about them, he always plays that down and says, I think the quote from him is, the only way you can do an authentic battle scene at the cinema is you should have people with machine guns at the front who are every so often firing into the crowd. But yeah, the action for 1957, this is pretty explicit.
I think to round off with another Spielberg comparison that this time is more favourable to Sam Fuller, it seems like in the depiction of battles and things that you've just described, which I think is very accurate, you can see Spielberg do similar things, for example, in the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. But I think where Spielberg hasn't learned the lessons from Fuller and isn't kind of living up to what Fuller was doing is that Spielberg, by his own admission, is a flag waver. Like he is a patriot, and he has that quite simplistic idea of nobility of these soldiers and things like that. So Saving Private Ryan, there is no sense of anything other than Tom Hanks and his crew, the greatest generation. Look at these guys, they're amazing. I'm not saying that's terrible, and Saving Private Ryan shouldn't do that with people that fight the Nazis, by the way. I'm just saying that that's clearly not what Sam Fuller's kind of vibe was. And I think that's something that's more rewarding for an audience and something that's kind of more interesting about Fuller's films in that respect, which I'm only bringing up because I've unfavorably compared him to Spielberg a couple of times. I think it's fair to sort of say that as well.
4 years like on foot through Northern Africa and the whole of Europe is what informs all of his war movies, and it is on screen. His kind of not just the sort of explicit references to things that he's seen and witnessed and experienced, but in this kind of what Herzog would call the ecstatic truth of the situation, that kind of authentic emotional core of the whole thing. And it's something that defines his life for many years to come in a lot of ways, which you'd fully expect it to do. And the fact that he meditates on it quite so deeply, I think is what makes these war films stand out for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right there. And I said to you before we recorded that I was going to give it a 2.5 on Letterboxd, but I knew that by the end you'd make me feel more warmly disposed to it, so I gave it a preemptive 3, and that has proven to be a good decision. You always manage to Yeah, make me feel more fondly about them by the end. One thing I wanted to point out, just as a stray observation that wasn't relevant to anything else during the episode, I know you're the fan of a nice bit of matte painting work. There's a
Yeah, I
lovely
love
matte
it.
painting towards the end of this movie. Do you see the one where they're creeping into the camp with the China Gate? There's a nice, yeah, that was good. That's all.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say about that other than it was a good matte painting, but I liked it. So next time, I'm confused because we've got, according to Letterboxd, which is what I've been using, 40 Guns is next. But you said Run of the Arrow was made before this. So are
Yeah.
we Run of the Arrow or are we 40 Guns?
Well, I had to cross-reference all of these premiere dates. So, I mean, if you look at 4 different places, you'd get 3 or 4 different orders.
Okay.
Because the
They're
books
both
I've
in
read.
there. Yeah, sorry.
So, Run of the Arrow apparently had its premiere on July the 25th. 40 Gun, China Gate on May the 22nd. 40 Guns I didn't check, so our technicality might have even, we might have even have quite got that. Release date September 1957
So
for
we ought to go with Run of the Arrow if we're going
yeah,
by release order. Okay.
yeah, but that's May to September, 3 films, and
That's crazy.
I think Run of the Arrow went on general release on the 5th of September. Like, Ridley Scott's got 2 films out at the
Yeah.
moment, but that's on the back of a pandemic and, schedules being moved all over the place. This is like shooting 3 films back to back.
Yeah, but neither House of Gucci nor the Last Duel look like they were made in 6 weeks either. So you gotta take the rough with the smooth there. But so is it Run of the Arrow next?
It is Run of the
I'll tell
Arrow.
you
We'll do
what's
that one
nice.
next.
I'll tell you what's nice about Run of the Arrow and 40 Guns. They're both in the 80-minute range.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm a big fan. So
yeah. So I enjoyed this when I saw this. I watched this recently primarily because I was starting to work through all the old Movie Drome movies. The stalwart film program of the 90s where Alex Cox or Mark Cousins would do an intro on a Sunday night and you'd get a film, cult film, or a double bill, and this was on their Sam Fuller night along with, I think, The Naked Kiss. So this is kind of a bit of a sort of boys' own adventure kind of sort of Wild Westy kind of tale coming out of the end of the Civil War. In the book, Sam Fuller tells a story about coming out of Dances with Wolves in 1991 with his wife, and his wife being really incensed that they'd stolen the idea from him. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of what it's about. And there's also this kind of slightly apocalypto kind of vibe to it, and this kind of sort of ritualistic trial that bookends the film. That's quite fun.
I'm very excited to see this because it stars Rod Steiger, and every time I see a film with Rod Steiger in, he becomes closer and closer to like being one of my favorite actors. Like if you just because the range of the man, like like in The Heat of the Night, Rod Steiger is obviously like the racist cop, and he's a very intimidating, menacing sort of figure. In The Pawnbroker, he's obviously that like really quiet, kind of softly spoken, very vulnerable sort of elderly Jewish man. And then you get like in Duck You Sucker or Fistful of Dynamite, he's the kind of asshole he plays the sort of character that what's his name plays in Good, Bad, the Ugly. You know who I mean? I can't remember his name suddenly.
Eli
Wallach. He plays like the Eli Wallach character in that. He's the kind of sweaty, laughing kind of Mexican guy. And then and obviously he's in like On the Waterfront and stuff.
Yeah.
Like he's such a good actor. So I'm really looking forward to seeing
Yeah,
what Rod Steiger's like in this.
well,
He's
just
not
looking
he's not Native American, is he?
no, he's a Confederate soldier. Um, Looking at this, I've seen so many of his films, and I'd never be able to pick him out of a lineup, except for the one film that I knew he was in, which was Mars Attacks. um, but yeah, I've seen loads of these. I'm looking forward to this.
You've seen it already, though, right?
Yeah, but I'm looking forward to your
excellent
take on this. That's what I meant. Sorry, I wasn't very clear there. Yeah, I must have seen him in so many. Amityville Horror. And
have you not seen The Pawnbroker?
Yeah, I've seen The Pawnbroker.
You didn't rate it?
No, I really like The Pawnbroker. I think I'm excited to see what you think of this one. I would imagine it's probably not much, and then I'll talk you around a little bit.
Yeah. That seems to be the way. I'm here for Rod Steiger. I'm looking forward to it. All right, then. So we'll do that in the next week or so.
All right.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. That's been all from us for this week on the Auteur Limits. Join us next time as we continue down the path to obtain a fuller understanding. Thank you very much.
Cheers.